Would you give up your children in order to gain enlightenment? Does letting go of attachments mean abandoning our relationships? Dr. Seth Zuihō Segall has some strong feelings about this. Listen in, my friends. Hi, it's Margaret Maloney, and welcome to Season 3 of the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. What an honor to have Dr. Seth Zuihō Segall return to the Death Dhamma podcast. In Season 1, he generously shared his experiences with grief, and now he is back to set the record straight regarding our attachment to other human beings. Spoiler alert, we might just need one another to move forward in our practice. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to say that we have a return guest from Season 1 of the Death Dhamma podcast, and a major source of the information brought to you in the Sitting with Death book. And that is Dr. Seth Zuihō Segall. And he is here today, again, I'm so happy he agreed to come back. And he's going to talk to us about attachment and some of the thoughts and experiences that he has had. And so on that note, I'm going to turn it over to him, and then I'm going to allow him to embellish the introduction, which I gave, which is very brief, and to share with us. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Hi, it's good to see you again. It's good to be here again.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, so you wanted me to introduce myself just briefly?
Yes, if you would just like to tell us a little bit about, you're so well published and always contributing. And so I know, since we've seen you, heard you, that you have more to share, and it would be great to have an update on some of your favorite projects.
Okay, so just very briefly, I'm a psychologist and a Zen Buddhist priest, and I have a Zen Sangha, or congregation, that I run here in Westchester, and I teach at the Insight Meditation Society of New York. And I'm on I'm a contributing editor to Tricycle, the Buddhist Review. And I have a few books out, and the ones I just want to mention is a book called Buddhism and Human Flourishing that was published in 2020. And then I have a new book coming out in September called The House We Live in: Virtue, Wisdom, and Pluralism. So those are two of the books.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, I hope that, and so I know you're going to be busy when you launch your book, but I hope that when you have time, you let me know when it's launched, because I know everyone is going to want to know about it. And so it would be nice to be able to share with everyone and remind them that your book is out, because I know it's going to be helpful.
So in talking about attachment, the first thought I have is that that's a very complicated subject. Everyone seems to think that Buddhism says don't get attached, that non-attachment is the thing that we ought to manifest in some kind of way or realize. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of problems with that idea, just simply said, because there are different kinds of attachments and different things we can become attached to. So we can become attached to people, mm-hmm. like when we fall in love, or we can become attached to objects, like if you think about a young child and its teddy bear.
Sure.
Or we can become attached to opinions about various things, or
yes.
various kinds of practices. This is the way it's always been done, and this is the way it ought to be done. Mm-hmm. And we can become attached to different images of ourselves too, who we think we are, or who we think we ought to be. So some of us take our profession as our identity. I'm a scholar, or I'm an athlete, and that becomes who you are in some kind of important way. If you look at the ancient Buddhist texts, okay, for example, there's a advanced set of teachings called the Abhidharma, and they talk about attachments. They talk about 4 kinds of attachments. They talk about attachment to sensual pleasure. Mm-hmm. They talk about attachment to ideas or views, mm-hmm. attachments to certain kind of rites and rituals, And then lastly, attachments to a certain view of oneself. Those are the ones
Okay.
that they warn against specifically. They don't say, though, in those books, don't get attached to people. Okay.
Ah,
On the other hand, there are stories in the Buddhist canon that do suggest that. So, for example, we the story of the Buddha himself, that we hear that he left his wife and child behind and went off to find enlightenment. And in
right.
fact, he even named his child Rahula, which in Sanskrit means a fetter, a hindrance, some kind of way. Or even worse, there's a very popular story in the Jataka tales, which are the tales of the Buddha's earlier incarnations, in which before he becomes the Buddha, in the life before, he's Prince Vesantara, and his wife and he has 2 children. And there's a story that he meets up with a very mean and greedy beggar called Jukaka, who used to have a woman who fetched his water from the well and stuff, and she was killed. And he needs someone to help him out now, like a slave. He asks Prince Vesantara for his children, and Vesantara gives them to the beggar, and the children run away, and the prince gets them back together again and says, no, this is gonna help me achieve my highest level of accomplishment. You have to go with the beggar.
Yeah.
So the beggar takes them and he ties them up with vines and he whips them. And at first Vesantara gets mad, but then he's going to draw his sword. But then he says, no, I have to conquer anger. And so he gives up his kids, and his wife comes back and notices the kids are missing. And she says,
as a mom might do.
She says, what happened? And he says, well, I gave them away. And she says, so because I'm trying to give up all my attachments. And she said, how wonderful. But then Sakya, when the highest God comes down and intervenes, unless to prevent him, not to get the kids back, to prevent him from giving his wife away too.
Oh, so there are limits. I see.
Yeah, but there's this picture here of the Buddha as someone who gets to be a Buddha by not having any attachments to people also. And I think that's just a horrible idea. I mean, so while I consider myself a Buddhist, I consider myself a Reformed Buddhist.
Okay.
And I want to say that that it's not that we shouldn't have attachments, that we should have the right kinds of attachments, and we should attach to them in the right kinds of ways. Okay.
In a healthy relationships way, I would imagine, especially you bring in your other work, but
yeah,
I think it's something I notice in friendships and in other relationships is the why does somebody want to spend time with you, or why do you want to be with them? And maybe that takes us towards where you're going about the right kind of attachment.
Even before then, I just want to say that I have a vision of what it means to flourish as a human being.
Okay.
And that means flourishing in a number of different domains. And the main domains are in the field of relationships, field of accomplishments, and the field of aesthetics. And I think that the relationships are probably the most important part for most people, that the things that give us a sense that we're really flourishing are the quality of the relationships that we're embedded within. Our relationships with our parents and our spouses, our children, our friends. Those are what give our life the most meaning and the most sense of fulfillment.
Okay.
And if we're giving those up, we're giving up a major area where we might actually create well-being for ourselves. And I'll also say that it's within that field of relationships where it's the most crucial place to practice mindfulness and equanimity and compassion and loving kindness, all the virtues that we're trying to develop along the Buddhist path. We can do it better in a field of relationships than we can do anywhere else. So this idea that comes down from us from the monastic form of Buddhism, that we ought to give up relationships and just, meditate on our navels and stuff, that I don't think that really brings us where we want to go. I think it's really in this world of relationship that we really learn how to improve our well-being.
And I think that most of the messages we might get from, say, like the Pali Canon are in that vein. But yes, there is the occasional story, right, of the monk who goes off to the forest completely by himself, cut off from everyone else, and he achieves enlightenment.
Right.
That's not the majority of the teachings or this story. And it is true, if I need to practice compassion on anyone other than myself, then I need other sentient beings around me. And, I appreciate you bringing us to that point, which is, how do we reach these goals, if you want to say that way, without having relationships? And isn't a relationship by nature some form of an attachment?
It has to be, because
right?
I mean, the way I look at it is people that we care about. Relationships are people we care about. We care about their well-being. They're important to us. We want to maintain the quality of the relationship for our well-being and for their well-being as well. I want to just leave the field of Buddhism and look at existential philosophy for a moment. Okay. And I'll say that when you look at a philosopher like Heidegger, he says our basic relation to the world is a relationship of care. That's the most fundamental quality of relation. We care about the things that happen because they matter to us. Mm-hmm. They either enhance or get in the way of our well-being or our sense of being our best selves in some kind of way. They add to it or subtract to it. Mm-hmm. And even if you look at amoebas, I mean, they're organized on being attracted to food and being, repelled by toxins and so forth. Mm-hmm. So life itself depends on this kind of sense of being attracted to and repelled by things. And there wouldn't be any reason to do anything if we didn't care about things. We could just sit there and just go to sleep,
Yeah, we would just do nothing. We would
do nothing and just fade away. But because we do care. And if you look at the work that the early psychoanalysts did, like John Bowlby, for example, with children, he says that, there's just a natural kind of attachment that has, just like geese when they hatch will follow the mother goose around and form a line, It's the same thing with children. They want proximity to their mom. You put them in a strange environment and they use mom as home base, and they'll wander away from her a little bit, but they always want to keep her within eyesight. And sure. If they lose that contact, they'll protest, they'll cry, they'll be distressed, And if mother still doesn't come back, they then go into a state of apathy and despair. I mean, this is just the natural way we're built. So to deny that is crazy. This is who we are.
Well, it's also, as you're talking, I'm thinking, and yes, and that's how we survive, how species survive, right? So like with the goose, that's how they survive. But as humans, that's how we survive, is somebody is caring for a baby, because we are amongst the most helpless, if not the most helpless critters born. If we want to ensure survival of this species, there needs to be some kind of a caring attachment made. And you could make a case for, if being reborn as a human is supposed to be the best rebirth, because that's the rebirth where we can reach enlightenment, then that's a form of attachment that we need to keep going in order to reach, I'll say, the ultimate goal.
Right. So somehow we have to combine this basic nature of ourselves to care about other people and to be connected to them in a very deep way. We have to combine that with the other truth of Buddhism, which is that everything is impermanent. Yes. And everything changes. And so we can, and usually people talk about impermanence in a negative way, that there's sickness, old age, and death, but there's also growth, achievement, development, new insights, new views of things that you develop over time, new skills you develop. It's not all a bad thing that things change.
That's true.
But you have to admit that any relationship you have, it's going to change. That other person is going to grow and change, and maybe that growth will bring them closer, or maybe you'll grow
maybe not.
In opposite directions.
Right.
Or at some point they may get ill and pass away, or you'll get ill and pass away. So we have to say that every relationship will change. And then the question is, when is it right to continue to stay in that relationship, or when is it time to let go in some kind of way and change? And that's always the crucial and difficult question.
Hints? Give us some hints. When is it time to leave?
Well, if the first thing you think about is in terms of your own flourishing and quality of life and well-being as a human being, and is this relationship adding or subtracting from it? And I would say adding to it, not just in the sense of pleasurable kinds of things, but adding to it in terms of, how do you think of yourself? What's your own identity of yourself? What are you trying to accomplish in life? Are you the kind of person, for example, who gets rid of somebody when they get sick, and just moves on? That's not the kind of person you want to be either. That's not well-being to be that kind of person.
Right.
So I think it's never an easy question, and I think the only thing that we can say about attachments is they shouldn't be fixated.
Okay.
In the sense that they're obsessive or they're unchanging or what have you. They have to be flexible and open to the reality of the situations you find yourself in.
So I'm thinking of intention as you say that, because I'm thinking of, if you decide to sever a relationship, you decide to leave a relationship, what is your intention? So going back to he got sick and I don't like sick people. I don't feel like that's not my best self or my best intention. But if it's a intention of, I feel like this is harming me. Great. Now
and I think the question is harming me in what kind of way? I mean, as someone who has been in a marriage where my first wife passed away after a very severe illness, it was a very painful period of time, that time of illness, and I can't say that gave me pleasure or enhanced my life in that way. But on the other hand, being a good friend to someone who is departing from the world, was something that enhanced my life.
Yes.
And gave it more richness and depth, and made me a better person in some kind of ways in doing that. So I think you have to weigh. There are all these issues. What's my life all about? What really matters to me? What are my core concerns? And just being happy all the time is not
It's not the answer, and it's not realistic.
No, there's no such thing as being happy all the time.
No.
Nor is it a goal.
No.
The goal has to be living a kind of emotionally meaningful and rewarding and psychologically rich and ethical kind of life. I mean, all those things have to fit together in some kind of way.
Now, what about when, let's say, what if I'm the one who's being left and I'm not ready to be left? And I don't mean in death. I don't mean, we both went through partners dying, but I mean, what about in, like somebody decides they're going to leave a relationship with you and you're not ready, but you have no say, because we're not talking about a horrible, creeping, stalking situation.
Right.
How do we let go of that attachment?
Well, I mean, that's the other pole. As we're talking about the fact that it is impermanent, there's also the important role of acceptance. That when there's nothing you can do to improve a situation or control it, and it's out of your control totally, then you have to be willing to let go. You have to be willing to accept. And how can you do that is the question.
Right.
Usually, there's a period for a lot of people. There's a period of grieving that you go through, and then you have to accept that this is going to hurt, that you're going to cry, that you're going to feel the sense of emptiness and loss for a while, and then it becomes crucial for you to have some kind of idea about, well, how long is that going to go on for? In other words, if this was the only person I could have ever had a relationship with, and there's nobody else who could ever come into my life in the future, then it's very hard to figure out how do you move on from that kind of loss. How do you live with that emptiness, although you had to find some way to do it. And there are ways to do it. But so, yes, if on the other hand, if you think that this loss is replaceable, that somebody might come into my life in the future and I might feel full again in that kind of way, then it's easier to let go. Or if you have other kind of compensating interests, I'm losing this relationship, but this is the moment of greatest success in my work or my creative activity. And so somehow that will give me the strength to go on and accept the loss.
Okay.
Most of the time, what that means is allowing that loss to be there and letting the hurt to be there and the pain to be there, and creating a kind of a larger space around it where you say, yes, it's here, but it's not sweeping me away or carrying me away or destroying me. It's there, but it's just a new part of me, and I may not like it, but I have to accept it in the way we sometimes have to accept chronic pain when we have chronic illnesses. It's there. I can't do anything to make it go away, but I have to find a larger space to hold it in so that I can go on. So this whole question about how do you let go is very difficult. And I've had, in my previous life as a psychotherapist, I've certainly had patients who couldn't let go. And it was very painful to see that. They had no way of moving on. And I'm not even 100% sure why they didn't have that capacity. But for example, I can think of one mother whose son had a terrible brain injury, and the doctors declared him essentially brain dead, flatlined on the EEG. And the doctors and the rest of her family advised her to turn off life support, and she did. But she never got over that. She always felt, I made a mistake. I would have been happier if I had just brought my comatose son home, and I'd spent the rest of my life just bathing his comatose body and changing his diaper. That was important to her, and she felt she had screwed up, and she just couldn't. I saw her for about a year, and she just couldn't move on from that loss. And she
really felt that she should have let him stay in a vegetative state and just dedicated her life to that.
And she was okay with having done that, And so she, even though her family was supportive and her doctors were supportive, she still felt that was a sense of loss that she couldn't get over.
Wow, that's a difficult thing.
Or I think of another client I had, for example, who had some minor surgery on her abdomen. And the surgery left a scar that kind of thickened. It's called a keloid scar.
Okay.
Not very large, maybe about an inch or two, and not in any part of you that shows when you were clothing.
Right.
But she had a sense of that her body had been vandalized, that it wasn't the same body anymore, and she couldn't be happy anymore. Huh. And she went ahead and sued the doctor. And you know how these lawsuits drag on year after year after year.
Right.
But in her mind, she says, I can't return to life again. I can't go out in public again. I can't be seen. I can't go out and do things again until I win the lawsuit. I have to get justice. So that's a kind of a rigid fixation on something you have no control over, really. You can pursue it, but the idea that I can't go on with a life unless that changes is a strange kind of belief. It's a kind of rigidity about things.
But that is an attachment.
It's an attachment, exactly. It is an attachment to the way I used to look.
The sources that, the stories you're coming, I think the source of those attachments are coming from perhaps different places, but they're attachments and they're controlling how someone's living their lives.
Mm-hmm. And I think about myself. I'd mentioned before we recorded this that I had a serious illness last year.
Yes.
In which I had a brain bleed, and I was in the hospital for weeks, and maybe had about a 20% chance of survival.
Look at, here you are.
I got home and I needed a walker, to do anything, to get up out of bed, to walk to the bathroom. I had all that assistive equipment, a shower chair and things like that.
Sure.
But anyway, it took me months before I was able to, physical therapy and occupational therapy, before I was able to get back again. And there's still some things I can't do. My fingers don't type the right letters the way they used to and so forth. So there's a sense of myself that's gone. Okay?
Right.
I'm now this person who now has, the world is different from me. And it's different from me in ways that other people can't observe. Also, I'm aware.
Because I've gotten communications from you and all the letters were typed correctly.
Yeah, well, because I have spell check, right?
Yes.
Thank God for spell check. But also, I know the way I move around the world now is different. The way I see my sense of balance, the way I went through months of therapy having to do with integrating my vestibular system with my visual system again, so that when I turned my head, the room didn't move. It's just my head that moved.
Oh, okay.
And so on. I'm still aware when I get up in the morning I walk fine now, but I have to pay it. Every walk I do is a walking meditation now. I have to always pay attention to what my feet are doing.
Wow.
So this is a whole new way of inhabiting the world. And it's not great. I don't approve it. I don't recommend it.
I didn't ask for this.
But there's a way you just have to accept, well, this is all right. This is the way it is. And then you just be grateful. I'm grateful I can dress myself and I can go shopping and I can drive my car. I was certified to drive my car again, I'm just grateful for everything that I can do. And you can dwell on what's changed, or you can just be grateful for what you still have. And I think that's an important attitude to have, that attitude of gratitude.
Yes, right. And yes, it's a popular saying in many circles, but for a reason. Do you believe that this gratitude is what helped you let go of your attachment of Seth before the brain bleed?
I think you just have to, maybe it helps somewhat. I think the other thing that helped is just thinking through what's really important to me in my life.
Oh, okay.
What matters most to me? If I couldn't write anymore, or I couldn't teach or speak anymore, that would be much more damaging to my life project than the fact that maybe I need a cane or something like that, or maybe make a lot of typos. That it's frustrating, but it's not a major inhibitor. So I think that's the question: what allows my life to go on in ways that are important for me and meaningful to me? And the fact that that's not damaged allows me to accept the other things much easier, I think.
When you're saying that, I'm considering all of us, I'll say it that way, that it becomes about what we attach to and why, whether it's not liking a scar on my belly or believing that I should be caretaking for this child forever, or having to change or let go of my work. And it's probably fair to say that we all have attachments. But I want to go back to what you said at the beginning, which is it is perhaps not realistic to think that we will not have attachments, because I call it that's being human.
That's the human condition, right?
That's the human condition.
Uh-huh. And I would say that I think that if we gave up our attachments, our lives would be impoverished in ways that we can't even imagine. I think there are people who say, well, I don't want to get into relationships because I don't want to risk loss or rejection. And I'd rather be alone. And I think these people live in impoverished worlds and impoverished lives. It's not like those lives are terrible lives, but they're not optimal lives in any kind of way.
I don't think they're full. As you say that, I immediately, someone I know, used to know, because I think she's cut everyone off, springs into my mind. And what I think of is the comparison of, would you rather experience the loss of caring about someone and eventually one of you goes away, because that's how it works, or the loss of not ever having the relationship? And so for me, I choose having the relationship, knowing impermanence.
That's right. And I think the goal of life is not just being chill and calm all the time. That's a terrible goal. I think the goal of life is to be in it for the whole adventure.
Yes.
Be all
in.
And to live it fully and presently.
And be all in. And so coming back to what you started off by saying, which is to think that we're not supposed to have attachment, this is not, perhaps I'm going to use the phrase, right view. To know we have attachments. I'm going to let you fill in the blank there.
And to be wise about what we attach to, and to be wise in terms of how we attach to it, with the degree of flexibility we have. And wisdom means wisdom in the sense of, do these things really contribute to my life project? My central values, the things I really care about, do they contribute to that or not? Or do they detract from it? So wisdom is always a judgment of that sort.
Wisdom and discernment. I think that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Well, then we're good.
Yes.
I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma Podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmaloney.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.